Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be jumping back into our ongoing retrospective look at everybody's favorite undead superhero with Spawn number 44. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in March of 1996, we see here that Tony Daniel is once again handling the penciling duties for both the cover and the interior artwork of this issue. The cover looks okay. Of course, this is coming off of the heels of us learning that Spawn can actually extract evil energy from the creatures of the night, as it were, and use said energy to heal himself. Now, the wolves, I guess, kind of make sense as nocturnal animals. Though this snake, not so much, as snakes very often are not necessarily nocturnal animals. And on top of that, look at the size of this snake. This part of the story is supposed to be taking place somewhere in the wilderness of West Virginia. And I can attest, there are no snakes that are in this 25-foot range of length who live in West Virginia, let alone the US. I mean, I get it. It's the rule of cool. It's a comic book, but come on, man. Like, try to keep it somewhat within the bounds of believability. Story, Todd McFarlane. Pencils, Tony Daniel. Inks, Kevin Conrad. Copy editor, Tom Orzechowski. Letters, Louis Bahalis, maybe? I'm probably saying that wrong. Color, Todd Broker, Roy Young. A special thanks to Bo Smith. And also a shout out to another Bo whose name is spelled correctly. The story begins with us being in outer space. This possibly is supposed to be Jupiter. It has a Jupiter-like appearance, where we're getting a monologue of someone who is actually quite upset at the downfall of the angel Angela and believing that she has betrayed the ranks of heaven and that this other person should in fact be filling her shoes and taking over the reins as the top angel hunter in heaven's ranks. We are then teleported down to the surface of the planet where we see that there is actually a small grouping of angels who are having a very serious discussion about what the future holds for their ranks now that Angela is no longer part of their overall grouping, and there's a void left in the priority A1 slot that she once held as the top spawn hunter throughout the ranks of heaven. One angel in particular is very distraught about the idea that this position is now open and believes that she is in fact the most obvious candidate to take over this spot. She believes that because she has broken all of Angela's training records and that she has never once even come close to being derelict in her duties or straying from the path, that she is the absolute most qualified and most deserving of being the new priority A1 angel. Now, I should point out, this angel that is in question is in fact Tiffany. Now, she is not at all named in this issue, but being that issue number 44 is in fact the first appearance of Tiffany, I wanted to bring it up that this is her name and that's who this character is, because I wanted to make sure that was being conveyed, that this is the first appearance of a new named character, despite the fact that she doesn't get named in this issue. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the sun is setting and the creatures of the night are beginning to stir. They are actually being drawn and beckoned by Spawn's costume, which is trying to bring them in closer so that it can siphon evil energy that they possess, that it can use to power itself up and then use that energy to help Spawn heal after his basic dissection in the events that he had with the curse. And the writing here is just kind of, I don't know. It feels like Todd's saying a lot without saying anything. It's kind of giving us an exposition about how all this works with a few tidbits of interesting information, but outside of that, it really feels like a lot of filler. I will say the artwork looks fantastic. I do like that Tony Daniel drew Spawn in kind of a withered state here, as we see that the necro energy that his costume is absorbing, it's trying to use to revitalize him and get him back to full strength so that he doesn't have to waste any of his own precious energy. We then see Spawn holding his head in his hand, as he is definitely still feeling the effects of all of the damage he suffered at the hands of Curse. As the wolves crowd around him, he looks down and sees a human skull sitting next to him. No explanation as to where that skull came from or why it's there, but here it is. The skull fills up with worms that are coming up out of the ground, and also some water somewhere. Maybe it rained that day. I don't know. That part's not really explained either. Spawn grabs the skull and pours it over his head, dropping all of the worms and the slimy ooze that's inside of the skull, and his costume takes in the energy from all of this. It is very much explained here that this evil energy is not being harnessed directly by Spawn. His costume is absorbing all of the energy and then transferring it to him. So, assumedly, without the costume as a conduit, he wouldn't be able to do this. And quite frankly, I gotta be honest, this is actually one of the parts of the Spawn mythos that I'm not a big fan of. I understand where Todd was going with this, but it just feels kind of convoluted, and when you think about it for more than like 2 minutes, it doesn't really make sense. The idea that any creature that lives at night is automatically of evil origin and possesses evil energy, and not just creatures of the night. We see all these worms that were in the ground. Apparently, according to what Todd wrote here, subterranean creatures also fall into this category, as they have quote-unquote rejected the light to live in a world of darkness. Therefore, they also are partially evil. And the whole idea that just because a creature's not living in the middle of the day, it somehow makes said creature evil, I guess, but it seems like you're really reaching for some sort of story element that you can add into Spawn's, overall mythos and how his hell powers work and everything like that. And honestly, it feels kind of unnecessary. I mean, it's Todd's character. He can do whatever he wants with the story. I get it. But to me, this just always felt like something that was kind of tacked on as an afterthought and not something that was originally fleshed out when Todd created this character. Back in New York City, both Sam and Twitch have gone to Sam's apartment to have a meeting in private. Sam offers Twitch a slice of old pizza, but upon noticing that the pizza box is covered in roaches, Twitch politely declines. He then makes a joke about the changes that Sam has made to his apartment, which is disgusting, and Sam unwittingly believes this is a real compliment and thanks him. They then get into the brass tacks of their meeting, which is discussing what their next move should be. At this point, the two of them have both been fired from the police department, and then taken the evidence that they had in the file that was given to them by Spawn and the files that they stole from Police Chief Banks' own office to a newspaper, which, after the publication of that story, the FBI raided Banks' office, and Banks decided to end his own life rather than face up to the consequences. The only problem with this is that the evidence that Sam and Twitch gave to the newspaper should have ousted a dozen or more people, and that's not what happened. The story only implicated Chief Banks, which means that someone else higher up was pulling some strings to make sure that he became the fall guy and kept everyone else's names under the radar. The next problem that they're facing is that due to the fact that they're no longer police officers, the two of them don't have police clearance, which means their investigation of this is going to be a lot more difficult. Sam then realizes that the only person that they can go to and get any more answers from is in fact Spawn. Twitch agrees with this, realizing that Spawn is the one who gave them all of the evidence that they had to begin with, and therefore has to know more about this than anyone else. He realizes also that they're going to have to track him down to get the answers they need. Unfortunately, the two of them don't realize that Spawn currently isn't even in New York City, but that doesn't deter them as they immediately begin to plan their next move and figure out how they're going to contact the undead superhero that has given them the evidence to put them on the path they're currently on. Meanwhile, back in West Virginia, Spawn's costume continues to beckon creatures of the night, such as these bats, to continue to energize itself and heal its host. Spawn is being a bit overwhelmed by all of this, so as a means of trying to maintain his sanity and grip on reality, he begins to once again fixate on his former wife, Wanda Blake, and then again falls into the self-loathing of remembering that while she was in fact the whole reason that he made the deal with Mabalja in the first place to come back to the world of the living, it was a double cross as he came back 5 years later and Wanda had already moved on, remarried to his best friend, and had a child. And as Spawn starts to fall deeper into depression and self-pity, he is snapped back to reality as a droplet hits his head. He looks up to see that this belongs to a saliva-drooling bear that has been beckoned by his costume. And once again, I don't really feel like this should have even been part of things. I get it, it's a big bear and it looks cool, but bears aren't even really like purely nocturnal animals. Black bears in particular, which are the type of bears that live in West Virginia, they're just as active during the day as they are at night, so he's not even really like a creature of the night. But I guess if you draw him underneath a moonlit sky, looking all vicious with glowing red eyes, he can be one and can be in possession of evil essence that Spawn's costume can siphon off. Again, I really just don't like this whole part of the mythos, and it just feels like something that Todd just kind of made up on the fly because he thought it sounded cool. We also see at the bottom of this page that Spawn's current power level is 6,801. Spawn then begins to bond with the bear so that his costume can siphon energy away from it. However, this entire interaction is being witnessed by Tiffany. She believes that this is some sort of satanic ritual and intends on preventing it from happening as she distracts the bear. As the bear approaches her, she immediately blows it to pieces with a single blast, showering the countryside in viscera and blood, and then tells Spawn that he will no longer be able to siphon energy from this creature. She then begins to gloat a little as she realizes that Spawn is in a severely weakened state, and also states that this bodes well for her as she will have an easy time dispatching of him the same way that Angela should have. She then refers to Angela as his fallen concubine, insinuating that she's very much aware of the two of them having a sexual relationship when Spawn teleported them both to hell in the Angela miniseries, though that doesn't really make sense given that while it did happen in hell, you would assume that heaven wouldn't have been able to see that this happened, and the only two people who were there were Spawn and Angela, and assuming that neither one of them said anything, which Spawn definitely doesn't have a relationship with anyone from heaven that he would have told about this, so assumedly maybe Angela mentioned it to people, and that's where she got the information from. It's never fully explained. Spawn is shocked when he hears Angela's name, but before he can react, Tiffany unleashes another blast. Thankfully for him, his costume reacts fast enough to block it with one of his chains, and she then states, "I understand why you would take this evil path and corrupt one of ours, as your master guides all of your actions. However, Angela should have known better and realized what was happening. She should have never let herself be corrupted by the likes of someone such as yourself." Which is an interesting way to put it. By all accounts, the angels all have very much free will at their disposal. None of them seem to be fully controlled in any way and basically are left to keep themselves in check, especially when we see that they can also very clearly defy the laws of heaven, as Gabriel set up the entire plot to try and railroad Angela. And Tiffany, in fact, in this moment is defying the laws of heaven as she is hunting Spawn without a permit, which is also completely against the rules and can land her in a lot of hot water if she's caught, especially if she doesn't come back with a trophy in hand. Spawn's chain then slaps the pistol out of Tiffany's hand, and Tiffany becomes excited as she states, "That's it, fight me," as she lunges forward and punches Spawn in the face, knocking him back, stating that she's waited too long to not have a deserving challenge, and that if she's going to defy the laws of heaven, she needs an extreme reason to do so, and that reason is in fact Spawn. She then knocks him into a small pond and states that she wants to get a full-fledged battle out of this so that she can use this as a means to prove that she is worthy of the priority A1 position. Spawn gets up out of the water and states, "Oh, so that's it. You're some kind of angel wanting to add another trophy to your case the way that Angela did. Well, go ahead, bring it, screw you. Keep pushing me. I've seen what kind of damage my costume can inflict when it wants to, so by all means, make it as angry as possible." However, Tiffany calls his bluff, stating, "I can tell you that you're in a weakened state and that your symbiote is trying to recover. And perhaps this is the way that Angela was able to kill so many of your kind. She waited until you were in a recovery period and then just came in for an easy kill. I always knew her numbers were padded." Now, interestingly enough, throughout this entire interaction, we learn that Tiffany is really not that concerned about fighting on behalf of heaven. The whole reason for her going after Spawn is really just to advance her own career, and that this is completely out of nepotism, not altruism. As the battle continues, Tiffany slices Spawn with her sword and then states that she always knew that Angela's numbers were inflated and that it was nothing more than a case of the weak slaying the weak. She dunks Spawn's head under the water and tells him, "It's no wonder you two found each other. You're both abominations deserving of unholy punishment," as she tosses him aside like a rag doll. Meanwhile, back in the sewers of New York, presumably, we see that the Violator is actually keeping a close eye on this battle as it happens, as he is taking great joy in seeing Spawn suffer. He laughs maniacally, stating Spawn has no idea how screwed he is, with heaven squeezing him on one side and hell squeezing him on the other. He's going to burst like a pus-filled blister. As he continues to laugh hysterically, he loses control seemingly and begins to transform from his clown form back into his true demon form. Upon reaching his true demon form, the Violator continues to laugh until he lets out a huge burp, and then instantly snaps back to his clown form, stating, "Man, that felt great." He then continues to revel in the fact that he seemingly has Spawn right where he wants him as he begins to play with some little voodoo-esque dolls that he's made, stating that he is going to be putting the screws to Terry and Wanda and Granny, and that he's very pleased with the work that's being done by Jason Wynn, his good little boy. He's so happy, in fact, that he gets up and states that he's going to celebrate by finding some puppies to kick. Meanwhile, back in West Virginia, the battle rages on as Tiffany is clearly outclassing Spawn in his weakened state, inflicting more and more damage until she finally throws him onto what I can only guess is some sort of downed tree of some kind. It looks really weird, and it, of course, impales him through seemingly the hole that still exists in his chest and has been there for months. However, Tiffany, of course, would not know of this, as she looks on, believing that she has her victory at hand. Tiffany then begins to move for the kill as she brings her sword up and lifts it above her head, stating that she plans on ending this battle by decapitating Spawn, which is in fact the only surefire way to make sure that a Hellspawn is deceased. Now, this is important because while this was a big part of the narrative of the Spawn movie that happened in the 90s, this was not something that was necessarily a big part of the Spawn lore in the comics up until this point. Of course, we had seen the medieval Spawn bested by Angela using one of the lances. She, however, did not decapitate him. She just kept hitting him with blasts from the lance until he was defeated and his body was destroyed. So this is an interesting new little twist that's been put on things, and I have to wonder if this had to do specifically with the script that was being written for the movie at this time. We then get into image info. This is actually not image info about any comics in particular. This is once again just Terry Fitzgerald writing about travels that he's had and people that he's met, other people who work at Image, talking about a trip that he and his wife took to Washington, D.C., and one of their friends' dogs, who is a Dalmatian named Lucifer, actual name, because of course. And it's not really anything important, but I guess if, you didn't have a whole lot of important comic book information to talk about, this is really all you can print here. We then get 2 pages of Image fan art. Some of these are really cool. I like this one in particular up here in the corner of Medieval Spawn. That's very detailed. I really think they did a great job. And this one down here that depicts Angela fighting Violator and defeating him by stabbing her lance directly through his mouth and out the back of his head. This is a super cool action sequence. I really like this as well. Despite the fact that it's not the most detailed of the pictures, I feel like just the subject matter alone is really unique and super cool. We then get 2 pinups, one by Chuck Dixon, and some of you who are a little more in the know may remember Chuck Dixon is one of the co-creators of the Batman villain Bane. Now, Chuck was more of a writer than an artist, so this isn't the most detailed picture, though it is kind of a cool little subject matter of Spawn playing whack-a-mole with a bunch of little clowns. And the next picture, which I like a lot, was actually done by Bill Ray. Now, Bill Ray, for those of you who don't know, is someone whose artwork you may be very familiar with, as he worked very heavily on both Ren and Stimpy and Samurai Jack. And honestly, you can see really good examples of what he could do throughout most of the backgrounds of both of those 2 shows. And a lot of those like really close up, like super gross depictions of Ren and Stimpy that were just like still images with no animation, those were done exclusively by Bill Ray. I think he worked on almost all of the Samurai Jack backgrounds in one way or another. Bill was an old school, like super cool artist, and I had not realized or totally forgotten that he had done one of these pinups in the back of Spawn, and I think it's fantastic. Ren and Stimpy was kind of a huge part of my childhood, and while I wasn't as into Samurai Jack, I always thought it was a cool premise, so it's really nice to see some of Bill's artwork on display here in this issue. We then, of course, get to the 2 pages of end cap. However, this is the exact same end cap that was featured in issue number 43 of Spawn. So if you want to know my thoughts about it, just go ahead and watch my episode about issue 43, because I'm not going to just repeat all of the same things I said for that episode in this one. We also, once again, see Spawn Direct. I've talked about this before. It was literally just a way to order Spawn merchandise and comic books and whatnot in a world where online sales had not become the dominant form of ordering merchandise or, any type of consumer good. And it's just a relic of a bygone era. And on the final page of this issue, we get an advertisement for the Spawn Wildcats miniseries crossover event, specifically issue number 4. Now, some of you may be worried that I should have been making videos about this so that it fell in line with the Spawn ongoing series. However, this miniseries is just kind of its own thing. It doesn't tie in directly with the mainline Spawn or Wildcats story in any meaningful way. It's more or less just kind of a what-if type of tale, and while it is cool, it's not something that has to be done in any specific order with the ongoing series of either one of these properties to make any kind of sense. But that being said, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, so tune in next week if you're interested, because we'll be taking a look at issue number 1 of this mini-series in that episode. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Spawn Ultra Action figures from McFarlane Toys, once again featuring an ad for the original Cygor figure. He looks really cool, but in my opinion, he's still kind of like the least cool Cygor figure that McFarlane ever made. And the following Cygor figures would wind up looking a lot better and have like much more detail than this one did. And that was Spawn number 44. And overall, I gotta say, I'm actually kind of torn about this issue. On one hand, I really feel like the way that Todd handled the introduction of Tiffany was done very well. This whole idea that she's an up and coming angel who wants to prove that she's better than Angela ever was and comes to Earth as a means to take out Spawn and succeed where Angela failed as a means of proving that she's the best. That's really cool. And it also really shows us that she's a force to be reckoned with as she immediately bests Spawn and, puts him in a real dire position. But then, as I stated before, the whole concept of nocturnal and subterranean creatures somehow just being evil because of them not existing during the day, and somehow that's an indication that they've rejected the light, as it were, it falls flat, in my opinion, especially when you start getting into stuff like, insects and worms and stuff. Like, worms are consciously making the decision that they're going to reject the light and, go towards the depths of hell and exist in a world that's removed from the light of good and God. Like, that doesn't make sense at all when you start to think about it in any meaningful way. But then again, these are just my opinions. You might think that that's a super cool part of Spawn's mythos, and that it makes a whole lot of sense that he can use the evil energy of these creatures to help fuel himself. And maybe you thought that the way that Todd introduced Tiffany wasn't very good. But if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.